Dr. Mbete, perhaps to bring it back to you, just on foreign policy, if we just listen to that specific clip of the Secretary General, he seems quite confident that entering into this co-governance structure or this government of national unity, they will not lose their identity and, most importantly, their foreign policy. They remain resolute. They will continue to support the people of Palestine. Your views on that?
Well, I think that, international relations and foreign policy is one of those areas where for a state, the consistency and predictability, so a new government, for example, can't immediately pull out of agreements that we've had. It's a lot more complicated than that. So it's a part of a country's broader policy landscape that remains relatively consistent over time, barring revolution. And so there is a point to what the Secretary General of the ANC has said. Something that I found really interesting is in the statement of intent that has been signed by the DA on foreign policy. The language that is used basically comes straight out of DIRCO documentation, that foreign policy is based on human rights, constitutionalism, national interest, solidarity, peaceful resolution of conflicts, achieving the African Agenda 2063, South-South, North-South, and African cooperation, multilateralism. It's
Quite
basically
familiar.
it's very familiar. It's basically the foreign policy that South Africa has had since 1994.
But it's before the Lekgotla.
And it's before the Lekgotla. However, I think that what's been interesting to me is to listen the way that the DA speaks around the Palestinian issue currently, is that a lot of it is around speaking and emphasizing international law. And speaking around, neutral, wanting to promote human rights, and so it has not been explicitly pro-Israel in the rhetoric that it is used in the last few months, in the same way as we saw earlier on in the conflict in Gaza. So what I'm saying is that I think that there's a lot more debate around the issue of foreign policy than people are sort of terrified of, and also that remember that in this grand coalition, parties choose what their red lines are and what the positions are that they want. And if the ANC says we want to keep DIRCO in cabinet and we don't want to give that to any of the other partners, then they actually do have a leg to stand on. The DA only released its full foreign policy document a few weeks before the election. The ANC also has the benefit as being the party that has the most coherent, consistent position on foreign policy, which the other parties, South African parties, could always forget about foreign policy. It didn't really need to engage with it. And because of its incumbency over such a long time, I think that the ANC has experience, has an ability in the area of foreign policy that the other parties, no matter what their what their bluster would be, just don't have. And I think that that'll give it a great advantage in those policy negotiations.
And I suppose, it circles back to part of the conversation, Prof, about, some who are looking keenly to see, do we still accommodate BRICS in this new agreement? Does our voice diminish on an international stage, or do we still have this voice, of a South Africa that went to the ICJ? So I suppose, listening to what Dr. Mbete says, there's still a lot more kind of way to go before you could get to how things maybe could change at a practical level, maybe not.
Yes, indeed. From recent debates at the Mapungubwe Institute, for example, there was a brilliant debate between Emma Paul and Phoebe Potgieter, DA and ANC. And there was such a good sense of rationality, of finding possibility to find common ground on the Palestinian-Gaza issue, that I think was a good indicator for where an agreement like this could go. There are red line issues for sure, and I think BRICS would be one of them. I don't think there would be any inclination in this current cooperative agreement to move away from BRICS. Rather, emphasis of all possible avenues of development, of investment, of cooperation. And so I really don't think there's any retrogressive step in this process.
I think, Prof, it takes us back then to the point of a subject that you've written about extensively, coalitions. And of course, when one then looks at this need for this legal framework, because these are some of the issues that you do talk about, you do speak about. What do you do when you hit a deadlock, for example? What becomes some of the issues that for you are sticking points? How then do you navigate around these particular issues in order to be able to co-govern?
Yes, I think even in this agreement that we've seen today, broad as it is, there is reference to creating conflict resolution mechanisms, acknowledgement that coalitions can break down, and the government of national unity format, even if I don't really think this is a real government of national unity, more a grand coalition, but they can be unstable when smaller parties disagree, even if a big party withdraws. So there has to be measures, and I think we see some of the groundwork being laid in here. The fact that today we've seen this tentative agreement is a good indication of transparency of coalition agreements that are made public. We would like to see the further detail down the road as well. And I think the government here is also taking some direction. They haven't gone very far, but following last year August's coalitions dialogue that was held in Cape Town, there was towards the end of last year, beginning of this year, a tentative framework document, only at this stage circulated internally, I believe, in government. I don't know if it's circulated more broadly than that, but that sets out some of the parameters of how coalitions should be governed, what mechanisms should be in place to stabilize them. And we also see some echoes of that in the current local government documentation legislation that has been gazetted for discussion. These broad themes that are relevant both to national and provincial and local are aired in that too. So I think there is modest progress, not enough, but there is modest progress to regulate that, and I believe it will take further shape in the months to come.
Professor, in as much as we're monitoring what's happening at a national level today in Parliament, there have been a lot of significant developments provincially, particularly in provinces such as Gauteng. KZN is still currently ongoing. We know Limpopo, they've got a new premier, she's female. Poppy Ramathuba actually won. Panyaza Lesufi has been re-elected. Your views on what we're seeing in some of these provinces, perhaps just zooming in on Gauteng first. Panyaza being re-elected, of course, with the help of the Democratic Alliance.
Very much so. And this coalition agreement here definitely is pulling through to the provincial level, and specifically in Gauteng, besides KwaZulu-Natal that I referred to earlier. So it is holding, Gauteng is going to be much more tenuous because it's much more imbalance there, a bigger shortfall of coalition majority, of one party majority in there. So it's going to depend very much on the continuous goodwill and cooperation between these parties. One can expect that that is going to be under serious attack by opposition parties in that legislature. But yes, so far so good for a first day of coalition stability. Let's see again in a month or two. But
there were a lot of threats last night, because the EFF, in their conversation with the president, indicated that they actually asked the president to tell the executive in Gauteng to stop purging its MMCs. And this, I suppose, was sparked by the withdrawal or the removal of Nkululeko Dunga and Ekurhuleni. Yes. And they went on to state that if he is not reinstated, this was supposed to be last night, they would be withdrawing all of their MMCs across the province. And one wonders what has happened to the relationship, because in Gauteng it seemed as though the EFF and ANC were getting along just fine. But now we're seeing what has happened at a national level, and provincial has most certainly trickled down to local government.
There were indeed, even before, quite a number of instances where there was fallout between the ANC and the EFF in some of the coalitions. They have not been hugely stable, even if they largely survived. And there has been, throughout this last week or two, been talk about the national and provincial also made to filter down to the local. So I don't rule out that possibility yet. We could still see quite a bit of instability at the local level as this agreement possibly filters through. We've seen in previous cases, KwaZulu-Natal, other provinces, where national realignment, coalition realignment of the bigger parties, really, like in KwaZulu-Natal, has severe implications, brings instability at the local level.
Thamsanqa, of course, you know, as we are watching these particular visuals from the National Assembly and a lot going on there, you are seeing these MPs, and I'm hoping we'll bring up this oath graphic that others are taking an oath, others are taking an affirmation, and you and I were talking about the Constitution earlier on and the importance, and these are the words that they are making as a promise to the people of South Africa, that they will be faithful to the Republic, obey, respect and uphold the Constitution and all other law of the Republic, solemnly promising to perform their functions as members of the National Assembly to the best of their ability. This, of course, then brings into question their understanding of what this is. Because legally speaking, this is what you're promising, and sometimes the people of South Africa see a completely different picture.
Yeah, I mean, we are not the only country that has politicians that sidestep from what their obligations are and what they've sworn to do, unfortunately. But
I like your choice of words, sidestepping.
yeah, but I mean, yeah, that's what they've sworn to do. That's what they're supposed to do. But often that's not what they do. So, and luckily, though, we have really strong institutions such as our judiciary, where if people do not do as they're supposed to do, they can be held accountable. And I think that's something to be commended, and that falls within the framework of our Constitution. So we hope that they will do as they say they will, but we'll see.
We live in hope. We live in hope. Dr. Mbete, when one looks at, and I'm going to single out Patricia de Lille because we saw her a short while ago. You think about a politician like her, for example, from her days, PAC, ID, DA, Good Party, so much has happened. And you look at even a lot of people who are watching right now to say that the Good Party has one seat in Parliament, and some would have even said to her, don't go into a cabinet of the ANC. You saw, of course, a lot of mixed reaction there. I wonder what becomes of her reflections as she's now part of this National Assembly, the 7th Parliament, but at the same time without a Brett Herron, for example.
Yeah, and Brett Herron was sworn into the Western Cape legislature, I think, yesterday. Yeah. And look, I think Patricia de Lille is a different kind of political animal to the rest of them, to the degree that she has been in Parliament on the opposition benches since 1994 and has had has been able to sustain her presence in the National Assembly and to be quite influential. She had her stint as the mayor of Cape Town, of course, but has been able to be quite influential on the discussions in Parliament when she's been there. As an opposition politician, we found out about the arms deal through Patricia de Lille. When she was still a member of the PAC, we saw her being in President Ramaphosa's cabinet. And so I think that she's definitely a politician who has a far bigger identity, and there's a few of them, than her political party. I do think that Good was faced, in a similar way to the ANC facing a big disruption from the MK. Good did face a disruption from the PA, from Al Jamaah to a certain degree, from the Cape Coloured Congress, parties that were able to really eat into a constituency that first the Independent Democrats and Good had been able to lay claim to, particularly in the Western Cape and in the Northern Cape. It's going to be interesting to see where she lands in the context of this new configuration of power in the National Assembly. Does she maybe get a committee chair? I think she could possibly be a good candidate for SCOPA as a one-person party. We saw that with Themba Godi and the APC a couple of parliaments ago. So I think hers is a really interesting political career of being able to remain as a representative in different formations over time.
It's interesting when you state that she seems to have a bigger identity as a politician herself than her political party, because that does her a disservice then.
Well, it may do the party a disservice, certainly. And I think that, Good has been, it's had a challenging time sort of building up its own identity and view as a party, its constituency, and an identity that is sort of, that can withstand the big personality of its leader. And I think, and the fortunes of those small parties change over time. I mean, we've seen the UDM come back stronger than some people would have expected in this parliament compared to the last, and that's a party with a very strong leader in the form of Bantu Holomisa. But I do think that GDM's been able to build an identity that has enabled it to have a sort of set support base that will support it no matter what, and has even been able to grow some of its support in this election.
And Prof, of course, as you know, we just take the final thoughts now. When you look at this particular parliament, its composition, the National Assembly, this is, you know, now against the backdrop of a Zondo Commission's report that was very scathing on Parliament, and they now go into this administration with a challenge, because they have to make sure that oversight is done, the committees actually do their most important work, and I suppose that's going to be where the nub of the issue is, on accountability.
Absolutely. You know, through the occurrence of coalition government and multi-party involvement in it, I think we immediately see a massive improvement in accountability. There is going to be so much transparency. I know Veronica meant to talk about the problem of cabinet confidentiality and secrecy. I would hope they find serious ways around that and limit the issues on which there will be no speaking out. And then, but to introduce these ones without fear, any fear whatsoever, that they can air those issues. The opposition parties in this deal will absolutely depend on continuing that previous insistence on accountability and taking forward those issues. And I'm pretty sure they will set those out as red line issues from their side, so that they can be follow up and follow through, because it will not benefit any of these political parties if they are helping to oversee a parliament which has no public or limited public credibility. So it's absolutely important for the longer term viability of this institution that they take forward these issues.
And Tabi, final thoughts? I mean, we're looking at EFF leader Julius Malema, for example, and then against what would have been this strengthened rules that we now saw again being published, some areas then being relooked by the Chief Justice.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo what Prof just said, though. It is an exciting time in South African politics, you know. For the longest time, the South African constituency has been saying that we need a change in our politics, because we cannot continue the similar trajectory that we've been on the past 10 years or so. And the hope is that, you know, with this coalition or this multi-party government, whatever you want to call it, but it means the ANC is not, you know, has outright majority, it will bring better change and more accountability, certainly from the executive, because the ANC, it would seem, would not have full control of what happened within the executive branch of government. So it is exciting. We're all looking forward to see what's going to happen, but we all hope that it's going to be for the benefit of the country.
All right. To all of you, thank you very much for joining us. Very interesting conversation, very special broadcast today that we've been having in conversation with Dr. Thembile Mbeta, Thamsanqa Malusi, who is a legal analyst, as well as Professor Susan Boyson. We continue with that coverage. As we stated, for now, voting continues. This is for the Deputy Speaker. The two candidates are Anlilo Trit from the Democratic Alliance, and we also have ATM's Violetu Zungula